All right, we're live. The first couple seconds of the video are gonna be me going. uh, Welcome to Dive into World Building, and this week we're talking about genre and description, which I think doesn't sound like a world building topic on the face of it, but it totally is. It's more about let's just say it's less about the architecture and more about the materials, because description is in many cases how we put our, how we literally build our world on the page. So I thought it would be interesting to take a look at how we describe what we describe about our worlds, and how genre influences that. So specifically, yeah, well, okay, so we talk about building these worlds, and we talk about all the research we've done for these worlds and all the details we know about the worlds, right? But really, the world itself is not on the page. The world is in the mind, and it's sort of evoked or implied by the things on the page, and there's no way that you can include everything, which is why authors have to be so careful to include things that are going to be, really important to the plot later, right? It would be nice if we had that under control. So this is all about choosing what we put on the page, and I'm gonna look at Glenda's chat bar contribution here. A quote she used as her signature on Absolute Right. In a science fiction novel, if I describe what's on a desk, the reader will use this to figure out the level of technology in the society. In a mystery novel, if I describe what's on a desk, the reader will understand that one of those objects is a clue. In a literary novel, if I describe what's on a desk, the reader will understand it to be a metaphor for the protagonist's mental state. This is from James D. MacDonald. Is this a classic
science fiction mystery novel? It gets very cut at desk.
Well, actually, I think it's all three, because I've seen J.K. Rowling leave clues in descriptions of
absolutely that's
things, and
all of these things are
reflect
applicable.
states of mind, etc., etc. But I believe there is a validity to the idea that certain types of description are considered to be more important to particular genres.
Yeah.
Did you want to elaborate on your thought, Brian?
I think one of the things is that the mystery novel stuff is applicable to some extent across the board because mysteries occur in other genres. Literary elements occur in other genres. One of the issues with science fiction and fantasy is that it can incorporate those other genres, and sometimes those other genres can incorporate it, but the description within a science fiction or fantasy story are absolutely critical because they are your way of getting the world across in the first place.
Right.
Most mystery novels are set in our world. They may not be set in places we're particularly familiar with, but there's certainly enough of an overlap that we'll understand them. Literary novels, again, there tends to be, there's a commonality of mental state. What's the line? Is it Babel 17 or Stars My Destination? There's the opening line of one of Delaney's books is the door deliquest. Now that tells you immediately you're not in Kansas anymore. It's that kind of thing that you have to do in science fiction or fantasy, because you have to. What we're doing here, you have to build the world for the reader.
Yeah.
Heinlein used the door dilated in.
Then I suspect that the Delaney was a reference to that then.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think there are several things involved. I mean, one of them is we're catering in a sense to the expectations of a reader. Readers are going to come into a work of fiction wanting to orient themselves, and so their desire to orient themselves in a particular way will relate directly to their interpretation of what we've put on the page, right? So in a way, this is why sometimes you find these instances where people who are normally mystery readers will pick up science fiction and go, I just can't get into it, right?
Yeah.
Because they have expectations, and they have certain kinds of perceived requirements for how they want to orient themselves to a new world, and those, if those for some reason are not met by the text, then you can get some complication.
Someone else uses the example in talking about using metaphors, and the example is something like Marjorie faded into the wallpaper. In any genre that's a real world setting, you immediately know that's a metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're in fantasy or science fiction, it might be literal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anybody here read daily science fiction on a constant basis?
No, I wish.
This morning, I get it in my email box. It's one of the first things I do every morning. I read daily science fiction, and it was particularly apt that this morning this one came in, because the opening sentence is, and I quote, "The gap between Ted's front teeth opened onto a solar system buzzing with civilizations of light and power." And I was assuming, even though I'm reading daily science fiction, I initially assumed that was a metaphor. It's not. It's literal. It turns out that the guy really does have, as it happens, some sort of solar system between the little gap in his front teeth. But I read it as a metaphor, and so I was very confused until I went back and worked out that was meant to be literal. Metaphor is not your friend in fantasy and science fiction. You have to be very, very careful with it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think in fact it's literal versus metaphorical interpretations are actually a trap in all kinds of contexts. Because our use of language is very metaphorical often, and can be quite literal at other times. So even within our own normal context, we can misconstrue things as being either metaphorical or literal when they're intended to be the other thing. And in fact, I use that as a sort of core language problem in my stories quite a bit, where humans are like, well, they've got this great metaphor for blah blah blah, and well, no, right? It's actually literal, but they had no idea. Yeah. And often it's like, oh, well, we knew this one was literal, but we didn't know that one was literal, and I mean, it's definitely a useful kind of trap.
Yeah.
So, the other thing that well, so we've got genre that enters into description, and I was going to engage with the question of indicating technology level. There was a period when I was doing this workshop where people would send me 500 words of their story that they were working on, and I would go and comb through it, and I would basically track what each word was telling me about the world in which I felt that I was, in the world that I felt I was entering at the time. And you'd be astonished at how world building can be done by a single word. Like, for example, king, right? King sets up all kinds of frames and ideas and expectations and all kinds of stuff, and whole big chunks of worlds start leaping into the story when you use a word like that. And so this isn't exactly about tech level, I suppose, but technology level is one of the things that can be indicated by a single word. I've mentioned mentioned before that when I'm writing in my Varn world, I have to mention electricity within the first paragraph, preferably, and within the first page, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because other cues in the text will lead people to decide that it's a medieval scenario, even though it completely is not, right?
Yeah.
The problem with using these words, and one of the reasons why we have to be careful in our description, is because there's this sort of giant chunk that happens when certain words appear, and if you want to stop people from drawing the wrong conclusion, you have to actively block the possibility of them drawing the wrong conclusion. So it has to do with exceptions to the rule. The exceptions to the rule have to be kind of in your face, or nobody's even going to notice that there's been an exception. And then later, when they realize what's really going on, they'll think it's your fault, and they'll say, but you withheld information. But I was confused. You didn't tell me the right things about what this world was like. And you're like, well, yeah, actually, if you go back, so these are kind of what I'm talking about is when we have world building going on in description, we can fall into, I suppose we could call them sins of omission, that are really they can trap us as well as our readers, because we want to make sure that we are blocking off possible erroneous conclusions, I suppose. It's a little bit like channeling water, I sometimes think. If we don't want to use the word, okay, I'll take a Varnic example again. If we don't want to use the word cast and have an entire massive set of expectations come into play in a reader's mind, then we have to make sure that we're engaging with the question of the word and how it's interpreted within its context. So, does that make any sense?
Yeah.
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 I think from you've got a character's point of view, so the reader has certain expectations, but a character may also have certain expectations. I've got a world that is really taking a lot of shape from watching these, where the original technology level is basically it's wood, and buildings are built with wood and brick, and the people who come in from across the mountains and take over, they have more Roman style of building and more the plumbing and whatnot that Romans have for their technology, the empire. So you'll get the older buildings, and when they're expanded or renovated or repaired, then you'll have the new style of architecture and the newer level of technology. So if you have a character who lives in the lower tech part of the world, and that's his existence. And he walks into a building, the house that is belongs to the ruler of the nation. He sees the original building, which is the wood and the bricks that he expects, and it doesn't look very different. And so there's no surprise to him, there's no surprise for the reader starting there. When he learns more about the house, he's walking around, and the person who's leading him around, showing him around the house, shows him this room with this enormous marble bath, and it's heated and has taps and all these amazing things that he's never seen before, and that's a surprise to him as well as to the reader. So. But there's no clues ahead of time that that's going to be there.
Yeah.
So So we're not shocking the reader, which I think is part of what we're looking at.
Well, I mean, I think
give clues.
I think that this is something that I was wanting to bring up in the course of the discussion anyway, which is point of view is an incredible tool for world building, and I talk about description as though it can be somehow separated from character experience and all that, and it really can't. or I suppose it can be if you're putting it all in the voice of an omniscient narrator, but you don't have to, and you can do a ton with point of view. And so I think that actually you have pointed out something that's kind of important, which is that you've got this character. He has a certain type of expectation. The reader, it wouldn't be surprised to see a bathtub, right? Necessarily. Because readers have seen bathtubs. But they've seen them in their own experience. So in fact, it's very informative for them to see somebody really surprised by the presence of this bathtub, because they can then sort of extrapolate backwards from that reaction to construct not only what his expectation must have been, but also what his expectation implies about the larger world. So absolutely, sorry?
I was going to say, this is why the traveler, stranger, outsider is so valuable and used so much.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yep. In fact, one of the things that I struggle with when I'm writing in Varin is that there really aren't that many travelers or strangers or outsiders. Everybody's an insider. They're not all insiders to the same social groups.
Yeah.
But it has taken me a long time to work on how to describe things from an insider perspective in such a way as to make it accessible to readers who are outsiders.
Yeah.
And not inadvertently to make the character sound like an outsider, because you don't want to have the character sound like they don't know what's going on when they really ought to.
Yeah.
There are
That's
times
the sort of as you know.
There are times when that could be helpful, though, because one of the ways you can show aspects of a society is to show your point of view character experiencing something that we would consider bizarre and strange as perfectly normal.
Yep.
So you've kind of got that reverse thing from the outsider who finds these strange things that are strange to him and to us, but the insider finds things normal, and that gives you the other side of the mirror, if you like.
Yep. And also, I think one of the things that I always say is that it's really important to establish what normal is as you enter a story, so that when you depart from it, the significance of that will be detectable by the reader.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I kind of liken it to running alongside a horse. You want to get the person running with you before you expect them to jump on the horse, because if they're not at a certain speed, all you're going to be doing is dragging them along, and it's going to hurt. Right? You don't to some extent, and this is not all or nothing, but if you miss the boat, in a way, you've missed the boat. And so sometimes when I have an experience, when I have a piece of writing, and I think, oh, this piece of writing, I need this to be so full of impact, and it's just not full of impact, right? What I'm describing is just coming across as flat, and yet, I mean, it's accurate to the world, and it seems to be accurate to the character, and I just don't know what it's missing. Very often, the problem is not there. The problem is in the lack of something to compare it to. So then part of what creates an emotional resonance in the story is the presence of this baseline normal that allows us to assess how far we've departed from it. Anyway.
Baselines are good things.
And I think the temptation is to jump straight into action, because we're told to start with action or to start with something going on. And a lot of times you'll see people starting with straight into the big conflict, sword fight, whatever. Well, I mean, you don't have to have explosions, and this is, particularly if this is not a character that everybody's familiar with, or a world that everybody's familiar with, then it's like, well, sort of ease us in so that we can kind of see whether this is important at all. Because it can come across, if you're writing something and you're trying to get more intensity just by doing it in the prose, it can come across as melodramatic because you're trying to get the intensity out of the prose in that location rather than using something earlier to establish some form of comparison or maybe even flashback or whatever it is, but some kind of normal that you can assess as a comparison. So anyway, so okay. There's another. I want to go back to our sort of initial topic description, which was genre and description, as opposed to character or that kind of thing. When we're looking at different genres, one of the things that we see is that readers of that genre expect, and we did touch on this earlier, expect certain types of description, not just to answer their orientation questions, but because they are genre readers and they would like to geek out on their favorite aspect of this genre, right? Genre readers expect to have their geeky pleasures recognized. And so for some kinds of stories that can mean, delving into gadgetry. And for some kinds of stories, that can mean describing every detail of the room or describing every detail of the character's clothing, right? You can probably tell which genres I'm referring to just by what I'm picking to emphasize.
Never describe clothes enough.
Right. I mean, So yeah, I mean, gadgetry I think applies to science fiction, but it also applies to steampunk in spades. People love their steampunky gadgets, and they want to know all about the gears and the this and that, and how shiny it is, and where the glows are coming from, and the sounds, and the right? I mean, because it's awesome, right? I mean, this is part of what makes steampunk. So by saying that readers expect their geeky pleasures, I'm not trying to badmouth, that at all. I have my own geeky pleasures in certain types of genres, or lengthy fight scenes.
Yeah, that's where I was going.
Yeah.
Lengthy, let's just look at the prowess of these fighters. Oh my gosh, that's so awesome.
I was thinking of military science fiction with the detailed descriptions of space battles. And this ship did this, and they maneuvered this way. they fired this weapon.
Yeah.
On and on and on. Which again,
Yeah.
totally, for the people whose that's their interest, that's great. It's not mine.
You know, I think that there's a balance, right? That you can. I mean, there's always a balance, right? There's always a balance between doing too little and then doing just enough and then really getting geeky about it, and this is so cool, and oh wait, self-indulgent. I mean, it's these little distinctions are so fine-tuned, right? That it's hard to know, and it's not going to be the same for every reader, for sure. And then there a lot of it comes down to individual taste, right? But I mean, like historical. Historical romance, for example, you're gonna find descriptions of the rooms, the furniture, the clothes, the manners, I mean, so all of this is important, I think. I mean, it's so part of it is food, yeah. Food is fun too, yeah.
I get descriptions of food in my stories. I'm not a very good cook, so I like really good food to describe it and eat it. And
it's funny because I think that in a way all of these things are really fun to describe and really cool, but we obviously can't describe all of them. And so, in a way, as we choose our genre, we end up thinking about what people are going to be wanting to geek out on in some sense. And it definitely influences how we end up, what we choose to notice. Noticing is something that is really, really important. And it's something that I play around with a lot because it has a lot to, I mean, I tend to use these very, very close points of view, right? And so for me, if I'm describing something, it means my character has seen it, perceived it at least. But they may not have noticed it. Or at least they may not have any sense of its significance. No. So I perceive those as two different levels.
Yeah, you can notice something for a trivial reason. You almost have to give it two reasons. For the character to notice the thing for a minor reason, but yet for there to be a much deeper and more significant reason that will become apparent later.
Yeah.
Because if the character's not, if there isn't some reason for the character to notice it, they're not going to notice it at all. And so you can't describe it.
Right. I mean, those are the rules of the strict, really close point of view, right?
Yeah.
If the character doesn't notice it, sorry, you're out of luck. You can't describe it. You're done.
Isn't that where you do that? If only at the time I had realized.
Well, okay, so yes. So there are ways to approach this. There are several ways to approach this. That approach is the retrospective narration approach. And then, of course, there's also the omniscient narration approach. But you can also do it with concurrent narration, so long as the significance of the item or setup is not understood, right? So I'm trying to think of an example. Oh, okay. So, oh shoot, I probably shouldn't give spoilers on my novel. um, well, so let's take a hypothetical example. So somebody goes into a room and they're looking around for some reason, and they notice that there's a key on a desk, and it's a desk that has drawers with locks on them. So their natural conclusion is that this is just the key to the drawer underneath, and the person forgot and left it there on the desk. And then later it turns out that that was the key to the social, to the safe deposit box where the treasure was hidden, right? Right. Our interpretation of what we see depends on the information that we possess at the time, and so, the description of the room is not going. You're not going to fail to include the key, but the key has no significance as such. Or, you could have,
or someone, looking for something specific thing on the desk.
mm-hmm.
A piece of paper with a name on it or something. So
Right.
they're just kind of riffling through what's on the desk, and they see this and that and the other, and one of the things that they go past is a key.
Right.
And you might have mentioned 2 or 3 other just kind of normal desky things.
Desky things.
How to vary it.
Yeah.
Vary
A paperweight and a pin and
How unfair would it be to say, there's the paperweight, that's not it, it's not under this, there's the key to the desk, and have it later be revealed that it is in fact a key to something else? How unreasonable, how unfair is that to the reader?
Well, I don't think it's unfair to the reader simply because this is the character's misconception about what he or she is seeing. Right? I mean,
That's
you
like
can't.
a mystery red herring.
yeah.
Right. I mean, but you can't blame the character for being stupid. Right?
Yeah, so that, from a character's point of view, if it's an omniscient narrator, the omniscient narrator is not allowed to say it's the key to the desk.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see?
Right.
Yeah.
So
I
again,
think that
point of view.
yes, if the reader has too much information at that point and goes, oh, this person's being just, oh my God, I'm gonna head desk because this person's being so stupid, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we can empathize with the person who doesn't realize the truth, right?
Yeah.
Right? Oh my God, he's walking into the room. Oh my God, he's gonna get killed. Oh my God, right? Sometimes we empathize with the person who's acting dumb, and sometimes we're like,
Just
that is the
no.
stupidest thing anybody's ever done. What the heck,
Don't open that door. You know you're going to get shot if you open that door. Don't open the. You open the door.
Yeah. So.
You see that?
Yeah. The way that we perceive things is very key, I think. Yeah. And so even like the way that we describe, in a way, when we have a character describe something, we're learning something not only about the character, not only about the world, but that person's state of mind, where they are in their understanding of the world at the time. I've got this one character in this book that I'm working on who talks funny, right? He's constantly speaking in malapropisms, and to the point, way more than you would if you were simply a person who was trying to act like a member of a higher class and be really hoity-toity and whatever. I mean, he speaks in malapropisms to an extent where it would be difficult to understand him if you were relying too heavily on the literal content of what he was saying, right?
Yeah.
So my character who runs into him is going, what? Okay. She's going, well, he talks funny, but if I listen kind of loosely, I can understand it, right? I can draw conclusions. I can kind of get what he's saying, right? So I get it. It's all good. I'm kind of winding us back to the metaphorical versus literal sort of thing here. In fact, he speaks that way for a very, very specific reason, and basically it's to protect himself from getting in trouble for what he says. And so he's never actually literally saying anything that he means. And so it turns out that listening loosely is actually falling right into his trap, because if you're guessing that he actually means what he says, then you're incorrect. And he's messing around. And trying to trap you into thinking that he's telling the truth, and really he's not, because he's never actually saying anything. He's letting you extrapolate what he's saying.
Yeah.
So that was perhaps complicated to describe, but I think that it's just another example of the way that characters can misconstrue things that are quite evident on the face of them, and even quite important to the plot. But nobody who's meeting him with her is going to go, oh yeah, I should obviously be on the lookout for people who speak in malapropisms because blah blah blah. Yeah. So, other thoughts? Moment of silence. I did want to tell you, actually. Well, this goes back to the POV thing. Thing is, hey, I want to make sure that I'm not doing all the talking, because this is not all about me. Even though I have lots of ideas, and that's okay, because I'm the moderator. It's all good, right? But I want to make sure that we're having some departure from just what I can think of. Point of view is really critical. We've already discussed that a couple times. We did an exercise in a class that I took, and this was a really interesting exercise, because I think that in a way we don't realize how greatly how much information is in a description until we start really digging into what happens word by word in the description. And I've mentioned this word by word thing. This is something I learned in my discourse analysis class, which I didn't get to till grad school. More's the pity. I wish everybody could have this early on in their lives. But we did this exercise, and it was, hello class. I'm going to walk over to the classroom door, and I'm going to do something. And then when I meet your eyes again, I would like you to stop writing. So I want you to describe everything that happens from when I'm standing next to the door to when I meet your eyes in the front of the class. Okay? So he goes over to the side of the door, and we all start dutifully writing down a description of what he's doing, right? He's okay, and he's straightened his coat, and he walks in the front of the class, and then he puts down a book, and then straightens his glasses, and waves to somebody, and then meets everybody's eyes. And basically he didn't do anything, right? I mean, it was all just really, really mundane stuff, and everybody went, okay, this is going to be so straightforward, right? But when you start reading out the descriptions, you've got a room full of 30 people. No two people have described that sequence of events the same way. Everybody notices something different about it. And some people call him by his title. Other people call him by his first name. Other people call him by his last name. There are so many different little tiny distinctions, right?
Yeah.
Things like articles. A and the.
Oh, that's terribly important.
A and the are so dang important. I can totally sympathize with anybody who's learning English and is struggling with A and the, because they're under the radar, they're tiny, and they're incredibly important because they say all kinds of things about the observer's knowledge of what it is they're observing, right? So some people are going to call the teacher Professor X. Some people are going to call him the professor. Some other people might call him a man, right? And it depends on how they're thinking about it at the time, right? The book that he puts down on the desk, is it a book they're familiar with? Do they know the title of the book, or is it just a book? Or is it the book he was carrying when he was in? Do they introduce it when he's by the door? Do they notice the book when he's by the door? Or is the first instance of the book when he puts it down on the table? Right? Do we not notice that he has a book until he acts upon it, in a sense? So I think that when we're talking about description, this is a little bit less on the genre side of it, and yet it is relevant, I think, to the genre side of it, because all of these things about what characters know and what characters don't know, what readers know and what readers don't know, and the distinctions between those can be really important and change descriptions incredibly. Sorry, Glenda, say that again.
What's normal and what's unusual.
Right, exactly.
From the character's point of view, and from the reader's point of view.
Right. You know, because very often you'll have, you know, a man in a cloak walks into the restaurant and nobody notices until he pulls it out of its scabbard that, oh my gosh, he's got a sword, right? And then you think, well, why wouldn't they notice? But maybe the soldiers noticed. Maybe some other people noticed. Maybe the people who felt very vulnerable noticed, but other people didn't notice. And I don't know. These are the kinds of things that I geek out about, and I think are really, really important, especially when you're doing a story that has multiple points of view, where different people can view the same thing in different ways. I think that's actually that one exercise. I mean, it's strange to say, one exercise in one class has completely changed my outlook and has changed my writing in a sense, because that kind of distinction between the way two different people perceive the same interaction is really central to why I write what I write. You know?
Yeah.
So
neat.
And it's cool, and it's worth thinking about. So, yeah. Anyway, look, I know we started late, but we're getting to the end of the hour. Do we want to talk about anything else? Any more thoughts that you guys would like to share before we wrap up? It's a quiet day on Diamond Worldbuilding.
It really was. I was trying to figure out how to write in the chat bar what I was. Anyway, I took a class in science fiction long while back, and one of the exercises the professor gave us was a scene. It's a booth in a dark bar. There's a Tiffany lamp hanging over the booth. Go from there. Describe the situation, you know, the environment, the booth and the bar and the lamp, and who's there and why. And I think there were half a dozen people in the class, and then so of course you got half a dozen different descriptions, which told you, they tell you about the character and they tell you something about the writer if you're close in a class and say, okay, that guy is not really paying attention to anything that's that we're learning in the class, but that person knows what they're looking at and is interested in this particular thing and is really good at description because I know what his character is seeing. but that's the nature of a small class is
Mm-hmm.
having some idea who your classmates are. But it was an interesting exercise, and I wish that I thought I had my contribution somewhere. But that was
Yeah.
a long while back, so that's probably not even in a box in the garage.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's so funny because we'll have these artifacts and then we'll go, oh, I wish I had that. Some of the things that I found, I'm like, oh my gosh, do I actually still have that? I should probably burn it. Like I have my initial attempts at writing the novel that I'm now attempting to write. They were really, really bad. Everybody's name has an accent on it. But yeah. Well, all right. We're gonna wrap up the broadcast. Thanks to everybody who watched, and thank you all for coming and chatting about this with me. I think it was a little bit esoteric as a topic, but I think that we talked about some really interesting aspects of it. So thank you all for contributing and for helping me think this through. And let's see. Oh, let me say what we're doing next week, which is. Come on, load computer. Tell me what we're doing next.
No,
all right.
We'll leave you hanging.
I know. So, all right. Yes, okay, so next week, March 4th, 3 p.m., naming conventions is what I was thinking. Names and how they're used. We've done how we name characters before, but I wanted to talk about things like titles and other aspects of naming. I think that would be kind of interesting.
Yes.
Our next guest author is going to be here on March 11th at 3, and that will be Deborah J. Ross, who writes all kinds of amazing things. She's the author of the Seven-Petaled Shield trilogy, which is, I'm reading it right now. It's very, very cool. So go read it. And I will now stop the broadcast, and we'll see you next week for conventions and naming.